Imagine being dropped into a world where the streets never sleep, where the air tastes of smoke, sweat and horse manure, and where your very survival depends on keeping pace with machines that don't care whether you live or die. Welcome to America in the 1880s, a place of booming progress and suffocating hardship. And if you think you'd last a day here, well, you might want to keep listening because you probably wouldn't. The story begins in a cramped New York tenement, a single room barely large enough to count as a modern bathroom, where Daniel Murphy, an Irish immigrant, wakes to the scraping of iron-rimmed wheels outside his window, his youngest daughter curled against him on a rope bed stuffed with corn husks that feels more like torture than rest. And in this suffocating little room with its one tiny window that opens only to a narrow air shaft, 7 human beings somehow live, breathe, eat, argue and dream. He rises with the knowledge that he has exactly 17 minutes to transform from an exhausted father into a machine operator at the ironworks. Because if he doesn't, there are hundreds of desperate men outside the factory gates ready to take his place. And as he splashes his face with water carried up 5 flights by his son the night before, you, the reader, might be rolling your eyes thinking, 17 minutes? What's the big deal? But in this era, a single missed day could mean the difference between food on the table and a family going hungry. His wife Margaret, already awake, hands him a chipped cup of bitter chicory masquerading as coffee, and their quiet exchange of jokes in the pre-dawn dark hides the truth that her hands ache from sewing. Her body is exhausted, and she's sacrificing her own breakfast so that Daniel has strength for the 12-hour shift ahead. This is tenement life, where privacy doesn't exist, where you hear your neighbor's arguments, coughs and snores through paper-thin walls, and if you're reading this from the comfort of your bed, imagine trading it for a rope frame that creaks with every shift of weight, with your mother asleep upright in the only chair because arthritis makes lying flat unbearable. Yet despite the suffocation, there's a strange intimacy in these buildings, a sense of survival woven through every cough and every gesture, because when the alternative is starving in famine-ravaged Ireland or fleeing persecution in Eastern Europe, even a filthy tenement feels like hope. Daniel dresses quickly, the fabric of his shirt already thin from years of mending, and if you've ever complained about a missing button, imagine your spouse restitching burned holes from factory sparks just so you can keep your job, because clothing here is both armor and dignity. He steps into the hallway, greeted by the layered odors of cabbage, smoke, sweat and sewage, the stairwell alive with gossip, greetings and fatigue. On one landing, Mrs. Abramowitz sweeps her floor, a tiny act of control in a world where control is rare. On another, the Ricci family bakes bread, the scent teasing starving bellies, and by the door, old Mr. Giannopoulos smokes his pipe, always watching, always nodding his ritual cold one at the factory today, no matter the season. Daniel joins the flow of bodies spilling into the street, and if you're picturing a bustling modern city, think again. The soundtrack is the clatter of hooves, the shouts of vendors hawking hot corn, the clang of iron from open workshops, and the overwhelming stench of horse manure and human sweat, a smell so dense it becomes something you move through like fog. Why didn't they fix it? Because this was normal. Normal to children who played barefoot in gutters, normal to mothers scrubbing clothes in shared yards, normal to workers who never imagined a different world. As Daniel walks, he passes signs of progress, telephone wires strung like spiderwebs above the streets, gas lamps being replaced by electric lights, and skyscrapers rising 10 stories high, skeletal giants built from steel his own hands might have rolled. He pauses with his son Thomas, only 16 but already hardened into adulthood, who warns him of whispers about a strike at the ironworks. And here's where you, the modern observer, should pause. Imagine being forced to choose between a little more pay or risking your life and job in a strike where police clubs and company thugs wait to break heads. And then ask yourself if you'd have the courage to gamble your child's next meal for an idea like fair wages. Daniel can't linger. The factory bell shrieks like a beast calling its herd, and he enters the ironworks, a cathedral of fire and smoke that makes hell look manageable. Inside, massive furnaces glow orange, steam hammers pound, and the noise is so deafening that speech becomes gestures and shouts. The machines have no guards, no off switches, no safety regulations, and every worker knows that one slip means crushed bones or burned flesh with no compensation, no care, no second chances. Daniel takes his station at the rollers, his arms scarred with burns from years past, his muscles already aching, and as the day unfolds, the rhythm of his labor becomes a brutal symphony, iron glowing orange, rolled thinner and thinner, assistants carrying it on tongs, sweat pouring so fast that even water salted by the factory to prevent fainting can't replenish it. And if you're sipping a cool drink right now, remember that these men drank water thick with ash, their throats coated in soot, their lungs slowly hardening into stone. Across town, Margaret takes her place in a garment workshop, crammed shoulder to shoulder with 20 women sewing shirtwaists for department stores where wealthy ladies will pay 20 times what the workers earn. Fires are the constant fear, locked doors the norm, and if you've ever complained about a deadline, try sewing from dawn to dusk, knowing that if flames break out, you'll die behind a bolted exit. Meanwhile, Thomas hustles papers, fending off gangs who demand protection money, his survival dependent not just on selling headlines, but on reading people when to shout, when to stay silent, when to charm, when to avoid. He's only 16, yet already calculating risks like a seasoned businessman. And Sarah, barely 12, becomes mistress of the home, fetching water from a pump 5 stories down, nursing neighbors with honey for coughs that signal tuberculosis, a disease that creeps through walls like a phantom. Her grandmother, knuckles twisted with arthritis, sews patches by candlelight, because in this world, even the elderly must produce to justify their existence. The family lives each day like this, their labor synchronized with the factory whistles and city bells, their fates tied to machines that never sleep. And if you think childhood means play, think again. In 1880s America, children are economic engines, and if they can walk, they can work. The ironworks consumes Daniel's body hour by hour, his muscles aching from the relentless repetition, his ears ringing from the constant roar, yet the machines demand attention without mercy, and while he operates the rollers with practiced precision, there's no escaping the awareness that any slip could turn his hands into mangled flesh. Around him, other men work in synchronized silence, broken only by shouted warnings, and every so often the sharp cry of pain cuts through, swallowed instantly by the mechanical thunder. No pause, no sympathy, production always continuing as if the injured man were just another replaceable cog in the system. And you, yes you, comfortable with your headphones and your playlists, should imagine what it's like to work 12 hours without a moment of silence, your thoughts drowned by the clanging of iron and hissing of steam, until your mind learns to retreat into a haze, just to stay sane. At noon, a whistle shrieks and men collapse onto benches or the floor, tearing into bread and lard as if it were a feast. Daniel unwrapping Margaret's carefully packed bundle to find a surprise, a bruised apple, a luxury that costs 2 cents and probably worried her all day, because in a family where every penny is life, buying fruit is an act of daring love. He eats it slowly, grateful but uneasy, knowing Margaret skipped her own meal to give him this brief sweetness. Lunch is over too quickly, the machines roar back to life, and as the afternoon drags on, fatigue sets in, every motion becoming slower, every mistake more dangerous, but there's no choice. Production quotas don't care about exhaustion, and the foreman's whistle ensures that no one dares slacken, because behind every worker inside the gates are 50 desperate men outside waiting to replace them. Daniel notices a wealthy visitor touring the floor with the factory owner, a man in a fine suit and polished shoes who lifts a handkerchief to his nose against the smoke. His gold watch chain could buy a family's survival for a year, yet here he stands, observing the inferno like it's a curiosity, while men like Daniel sacrifice their bodies daily. And isn't that the essence of the Gilded Age? Luxury for the few, hell for the many. Evening comes at last, the whistle signaling freedom but not rest, because as Daniel stumbles into the street, drenched in sweat and ash, he knows the walk home is only a prelude to another shift of labor, fatherhood, husbandry, community survival. Meanwhile, across town, Margaret bends over fabric with aching fingers in Mrs. Goldstein's garment workshop, the air thick with lint and oil, her body jammed between other women who mutter in a mix of languages, Yiddish, Italian, Polish, English, voices weaving together into the chorus of immigrant survival, and though her back aches, she sews with determination, because every extra piece means 3 more cents, and if you think 3 cents is nothing, remember that in 1882 it might be the difference between soup with beans and soup without. The danger is constant, fires ignite easily in these tinderbox rooms, exits are locked to prevent theft, and the women know stories of others burned alive behind bolted doors, but still they stitch, 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 because poverty leaves no alternative. When a wealthy customer breezes in to inspect the order, her feathered hat worth more than a month's wages, she compliments the blue trim as if it's a casual detail, while Margaret forces a polite smile and keeps sewing, her dignity intact even when treated like part of the furniture. These are the moments where pride battles resentment, tiny sparks of resistance smouldering under the surface, but rarely igniting because survival demands silence. And then there's Thomas shouting, "Extra! Extra! 5 dead in Pittsburgh strike." Though the real headline is softer, he knows exaggeration sells papers, and sales mean pennies, and pennies mean dinner. On his corner, gangs of older boys demand protection money, policemen swing nightsticks with casual authority, and businessmen hurry past, barely noticing the ragged child who is both invisible and essential. Thomas navigates this urban jungle like a seasoned strategist, dodging threats, currying favors, and if you want to admire hustle, forget modern entrepreneurs. Look at a 16-year-old immigrant boy who can turn a paper route into survival.
At home, young Sarah shoulders responsibility no child should bear, fetching water from the pump and climbing 5 flights with a bucket heavier than her arms can manage, mending clothes beside her arthritic grandmother, checking in on the Kowalskis next door, where tuberculosis coughs echo through the walls. And if you've ever skipped chores as a child, remember Sarah, who manages a household before she's even a teenager. Evening falls, and the family gathers in their single room, pooling wages with solemn ritual, Daniel's pay packet already shorted by deductions for the company store, Margaret's meagre piecework coins, Thomas's handful of pennies, Sarah's contribution in labour rather than cash, all laid out on the table with reverence because this is survival calculated to the cent. They eat watery soup stretched with beans and scraps of pork, tearing day-old bread from the bakery as if it were gold, laughter breaking through hunger as their stomachs rumble in unison. And here's a detail you shouldn't miss. Humour isn't a luxury here, it's a weapon, a shield, a way to turn despair into resilience, because if you can laugh at soup too thin to fill your belly, then you've already defeated hopelessness. After dinner, work resumes, Margaret sewing, Daniel repairing a loose floorboard, Thomas reading headlines aloud to practice literacy, Sarah sorting fabric scraps, grandmother stitching patches, and if you think evenings are for rest, think again, because in the tenements, every waking hour must be productive. News of politics filters through Thomas's halting reading, President Arthur's civil service reforms, railroad strikes, the ongoing construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, and while Daniel scoffs at corrupt politicians, he marvels at the bridge, dreaming of walking across air itself, though Thomas reminds him that 20 workers have already died building it, progress always paid in blood. Outside, music drifts up from the courtyard, an impromptu concert of fiddles, whistles and accordion, neighbours gathering to share songs from Ukraine, Italy, Ireland, China, cultures colliding in joyous defiance of poverty, and Sarah begs to join, her face glowing with hope, until Margaret relents, allowing her and Thomas a brief taste of childhood. They join Rosa Abramowitz and her cousin fresh from Poland, exchanging games, tricks and dances, this tiny multicultural gathering symbolizing the patchwork of America itself, where the poor mix freely while the wealthy build walls. Yet even here danger lurks as rival ethnic tensions simmer, young men eye girls across cultural lines, and fights threaten to erupt because even joy comes with risk in the tenements. Into this scene walks Jacob Rees, a journalist with a camera, observing families like specimens, scribbling notes as Sarah innocently tells him their rent, their water supply, their crowded room, while Thomas bristles with suspicion, sensing the imbalance of power in being studied like an animal at the zoo. And here's where the narrative winks at you. Yes, you, because you're doing the same thing, aren't you? Reading their lives from a safe distance, consuming their hardship as a story, and yet maybe, just maybe, this story makes you see them not as curiosities but as people. Back upstairs, Daniel warns against trusting reformers who take pictures and then vanish to comfortable homes, unaware that Reese's work will one day spark housing reform, though for now it feels like exploitation. Night descends, and the family spreads across the tiny room, Margaret and Daniel on the rope bed, Thomas on a pallet, Sarah with her grandmother, the air heavy with sweat, the walls echoing with coughs and snores, sleep broken by heat and fear. Daniel lies awake, replaying the day's events, the organizer's whispers at the factory, the photographer's questions in the courtyard, and wonders if change is possible, or if this endless cycle of toil will devour his children too. Outside, factory whistles mark the changing shifts, babies cry, drunks sing in the streets, and the industrial heartbeat of New York pounds on, relentless, uncaring, but inside this one room, love flickers like a fragile candle against the storm. Morning crashes back into the tenement, like an unwelcome guest, no gentle sunrise or leisurely breakfast, just the shrill demands of survival dragging everybody into motion. And if you think alarms are annoying, try waking to the cough of tuberculosis next door, or the sound of buckets clanging at the public pump. Daniel dresses quickly in the semi-darkness, his back stiff from yesterday's labor, but already bracing for another 12 hours of heat and danger, while Margaret heats water in the dented pot, her fingers moving automatically despite their swelling joints, and Sarah helps her grandmother out of bed, easing her twisted hands into function because here, even rising from a chair is a team effort. A knock comes, and Thomas returns with Patrick Ali, once just a boy from the building but now a medical student, summoned to see the dying Mrs. Kowalski. His black bag looks tiny against the enormity of her illness, and even at 18, he carries the heavy air of someone who knows knowledge won't always be enough, but still he tries, because in this community, every step upward carries an unspoken debt to help those still trapped below. Daniel tells Margaret he'll be late tonight, there's a meeting after work, and you know what that means, don't you? Yes, union talk, dangerous whispers of collective power, because men are losing fingers, hands, even lives with no compensation, and someone has to say enough, though every worker also knows the risk. Strike too hard, and your children starve. Stay silent, and your children inherit your chains. At the ironworks, the day unfolds as always, machines pounding, sweat pouring, the air a furnace, but Daniel's mind drifts to those whispers, to the possibility that unity might bend the system, and he wonders if courage can outweigh hunger. Meanwhile, Margaret continues her grind at the garment shop, dodging the sharp tongue of Mrs. Goldstein and the oblivious chatter of wealthy clients, her sewing needle a weapon of survival, and she exchanges wary glances with Rosa, as talk of union circulates even here, women daring to imagine safer rooms and unlocked doors, though they know too well that fire, not change, is the more immediate reality. Thomas hustles through his day, outmaneuvering Butch and his gang of corner boys with the occasional well-timed intervention from Officer Sullivan, who treats him with a rough camaraderie, born of shared Irish roots. On the surface, these tiny alliances look like luck, but you and I both know their strategy, the survival instinct of a boy forced to grow up in alleys instead of classrooms. Sarah tends to her chores with a maturity that should shame anyone who ever whined about cleaning their room, hauling water, mending, checking in on neighbors, all while keeping the household functional, her childhood compressed into service, her resilience already that of an adult. Evening gathers, and the Murphy family reunites in their small room, the ritual of pulling wages unfolding again like a sacred rite, each coin counted with the precision of accountants, because pennies here decide survival, and as soup simmers with scraps of pork, beans and bread, they joke about the rumbling of stomachs, laughter once again transforming scarcity into solidarity. But the cough next door grows louder, wetter, more ominous, and the unspoken knowledge hangs in the room. Consumption will take Mrs. Kowalski soon, and her husband cannot pay the $5 doctor's fee, an impossible sum that mocks the very concept of choice.
In these moments, the tenement reveals its cruelest truth. Suffering is communal. Death seeps through the walls, and even if it's not your family today, it could be tomorrow. Yet amid despair, joy persists. Neighbors gather in the courtyard again, fiddles and whistles filling the air, dances mixing traditions, children laughing, cultures blending into something uniquely American. And Sarah watches wide-eyed as Thomas performs a coin trick, passing knowledge picked up from a sailor to other children, the exchange of skills and stories forming a hidden curriculum of survival, more valuable than any classroom. But not everyone in the courtyard comes for joy. Among them are reformers, journalists, outsiders with cameras and notebooks, cataloguing poverty as spectacle. Jacob Rees lingers again, scribbling down the number of occupants per room, the rent, the pump water, while Sarah blurts out the facts proudly, too young to understand the implications, and Thomas pulls her back, sensing the indignity of being reduced to data. And here's where the narrative pulls you, the reader, into the mirror. You're reading this too, aren't you? Turning their pain into a story consumed from comfort, and though your intentions might be nobler than Reese's detached notes, you still walk away to your clean water, your stocked fridge, your soft bed, leaving Daniel and his family inside their endless grind. Night falls heavy, and as the Murphys work by lamplight, Daniel admits to Margaret that the whispers of organizing have grown louder, recounting the story of Fitzgerald losing 3 fingers with no doctor, no pay, nothing but a warning to work or starve, and Margaret reminds him of the risks, because what good is a union victory if your children go hungry in the meantime? They both know there is no good answer, only impossible choices. Below, the courtyard celebration swells, an orchestra of resilience forged from poverty, but upstairs the Murphys stitch, patch and plan, fighting exhaustion because rest is for those who can afford it. Eventually children drift to sleep, Margaret and Daniel collapse onto their rope bed, and the room quiets, though quiet in a tenement is relative. The snores, the coughs, the cries of infants seep through walls thinner than paper, weaving together the sounds of survival and decline. Daniel lies awake, thoughts circling like crows, the factory organizer's fiery words, the photographer's notebook, the fragility of his children's futures, and he wonders, will Thomas escape this cycle? Will Sarah's determination carry her beyond these walls? Or will the ironworks and sewing tables claim them too? Outside, the city's heart never stops beating. Whistles mark the change of shifts, horses clatter down cobblestones, saloons spill out drunken laughter, and police patrol shadows where danger breeds. But inside this single room, the Murphys cling to each other, carving out dignity in a world designed to deny it. And here's the thing you should take with you. Yes, you still reading, still imagining. History remembers the mansions of Fifth Avenue, the gilded towers, the tycoons whose names adorn universities, but the real backbone of America in the 1880s wasn't gilded at all. It was bent backs and blistered hands, children hauling buckets, women sewing until their eyes blurred, men operating machines that chewed through flesh and bone without hesitation. The Murphys aren't in your history books, but they were real enough, multiplied by millions, each family a gear in the great machine of industrial America, each sacrifice paving roads, building bridges, forging rails, laying the foundation for the modern world you now take for granted. So next time you step into an air-conditioned room, or complain about your Wi-Fi dropping, or sigh at your 9 to 5, remember this: they worked 14 hours for survival, they shared one toilet with 20 families, they ate soup so thin it was closer to water than meal, and they still laughed, loved, dreamed, and believed their children might live better. That's the hook of the story, and the gut punch of the ending, because the truth is, you wouldn't last a day in their shoes, but they lasted lifetimes, and in their survival lies the reason you exist at all.